Alright, so we continue studying Jaenisch Gambit, and this will be a part about pretty interesting variation. So we start with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, f5, and now there's a very logical move, namely d4. It looks very good because white is opening the center, trying to use the fact that black weakened his king by playing f5. So black takes on e4, knight takes e5. And now black has a very strong response. Instead of playing knight f6, that looks more or less logical, black takes on e5, d takes e5. Of course, queen h5 check doesn't work because of knight g6, simply. So d takes e5, and now c6. And the point here is that wherever white goes with his bishop, black has check on a5, and later he takes the pawn on e5. Later is actually in the next move. Which means that white should sacrifice the bishop, as we will see later, but let me show you what happens, in fact, if white moves back. For example, bishop e2. Queen a5 as promised. Check. Bishop d2. Queen takes e5. So now white plays bishop c3. This is the idea of move bishop d2. Queen goes to g5. And white gives check on h5. That's the idea of moving the bishop back to e2. The whole idea of bishop e2 and bishop d2 is to give this check. Now the problem for black is that he cannot play g6 because of bishop takes h8. And he's in trouble. So instead of playing g6, black is forced to go with the king to d8. However, we will see this is not much of a problem. Let me show you also what happens after short castle. Here the easiest for black is to play knight f6. Now if white attempts to open the center, what he should do in this position, by playing f3 for example, black has check on c5, king h1, and d5. And after all, his position is very good. He maintains an extra pawn, he has almost completed his development, and in the next move he can play short castle. More or less the same story we see after knight d2, so bishop takes f6 is a threat, so d5 to protect the pawn, and now black wants to play bishop h3 with the idea to checkmate on g2. Certainly he has almost one position. So for this reason, if white plays all these moves with bishop e2, then he has to give the check. King d8. And it turns out that actually the king of black is not as bad as it looks, because the king will later go to c7, black will play d5, develop the bishop from c8, play with rook a8 to d8 or e8, and actually create an artificial castle. And what matters the most is that because of bishop on h5, black will be able to play knight f6 and win additional time for his development, because the bishop will have to leave from h5. So now let's see how it looks in practice. So short castle, knight f6, bishop goes to e2. Of course, bishop takes f6 is possible, but then after queen takes f6, obviously black has no problems because he has two bishops. He has the control over black squares in the position, and still he has this extra pawn, and it matters. Because the pawn is really strong. So giving up the bishop is really bad. For this reason, bishop e2 is a better move. And now black simply plays d5. Whatever white does in the next move, black can play bishop c5 or king c7. And in addition, bishop h3 is a very unpleasant threat again. So here, instead of bishop e2, if white, for example, plays f4, this is a trap, so please don't take on h5 because of bishop takes f6, and you lose your queen on h5. So, but you can simply play queen h6, and after bishop e2, bishop c5, king h1, d5. I think there is no question that the position of black is superior. Again, the king will escape to c7, the bishop from c8 will go to e6, and rook a8 will move to d8. Black will create artificial castle. Alright, so now let me show what happened in a game where Judith Polgar had white. Instead of short castling, he played g3. There is no reason to believe that this is much stronger. Again, black plays knight f6, bishop e2, bishop c5, bishop d4, and simply king c7. And again, black has extra pawn, actually for free. After knight c3, he can simply play rook e8. And then d6, bishop h3, and so on. Alright, so now let's look what happens if white goes with his bishop not to e2 but to c4. Bishop c4, again, queen a5. If black doesn't take the pawn, then his position is simply lost because the pawn e5 is very strong. So he has to take the pawn in any case, and besides, it's really a good idea. So knight c3, here bishop d2 doesn't make much sense, queen takes e5. Bishop takes g2. Why white plays this is easy to explain. After short castle, black wins time by playing d5. Now bishop b3, knight f6, and it is clear that black is winning. He wants to play bishop d6, winning more time. With idea queen takes h2, and then castling short. So white wants to create kind of counterplay by taking on g8, rook takes g8, and bishop e3. His idea is to play queen d2, to castle long, and then to try to exercise some pressure on the position of black. However, it doesn't work. It's too slow. d5, queen d2, bishop d6, long castle, and black simply plays king f7. His idea is simple. He wants to play rook e8 and king g8. So, for example, if white plays f3, trying to open the position, e takes f3, rook h, f1. The easiest for black now is simply to play rook e8. And now after rook takes f3, king g8, he maintains extra pawn and the pair of bishops. In addition, bishop g4 is a threat. So this is what happens if white moves the bishop back from b5. Now, so I hope I could persuade you that the only chance for white is to sacrifice this unlucky bishop, and he does it by playing knight c3. So, of course, black is forced to take on b5, and white takes the pawn e4. And if you look at this position, this looks much more dangerous than what we saw in other lines, because here the pawn e5 is alive, which means that the knight g8 cannot go to f6. In addition, bishop c8 looks at the moment pretty bad, and the most important is that it will take black a lot of time to bring his king in safety. So if black plays slowly, then white can create very dangerous attack on the black king. For this reason, black should give back some of the material he has won and play d5. First of all, this opens the bishop c8 and allows him to enter the game. Secondly, it wins time because white still cannot castle short because knight on e4 hangs. Giving up two pieces would be too much. There will be nothing left to checkmate the king. So d5, e takes d6, knight f6, and now short castle. Instead of short castle, there are two other moves. The first of them is bishop g5. Here the trick is that black plays queen a5, and the knight e4 hangs, so that white has to go back with his knight b4, attacking both bishop g5 and knight c3. Here it is important to know that queen e2 and this kind of checks, they don't promise much, because the king goes to f7, and the king on f7 is actually safer than on e8, because it is closer to the artificial castle again. So now the pawn d6 hang, knight c3 hang, and black can also play bishop g4 and rook e8. So white should keep the black king on e8, take on f6. G takes f6. Of course, after taking on c3, bishop takes c3. Here the compensation is very strong, because white already has 3 pawns, and the black cannot give any checks. So after queen g5, for example, white can castle short. Now rook e1 is unpleasant threat. And in addition, note that such moves like king f7 do not work because of d7. So that's not a pleasant position to play. It is better to take the bishop f6, knight d5, white develops his initiative, and now black has to play king f7. If instead of king f7 black would take on d6, white gets a very dangerous attack after queen h5, king d8. This is actually the only move. King f8, queen h6 loses immediately. So king d8, and now there is a nice choice. White can play long castle, but then he has to take in account that black can take on a2. It's easier to play short castle. Bishop e6, rook a d1. And here white has excellent compensation. So black has to take care. And there are some moves that you really need to remember, like the move king f7 in this position. So now after queen h5, black can simply go to g7. And now there is no check on g4. That's very important. And the knight d5 is pinned. So the pawn d6 hangs. In addition, bishop e6 is a good idea. So queen h5 doesn't bring anything. What else? For example, after short castle, black simply takes on d6. Now after knight takes f6, black has bishop takes h2, king takes h2, queen e5, let's say f4, and queen takes f6. And the queen is close to the king, and in the next move bishop e6 follows, and again the position of black is close to 1. So the strongest move instead of short castle and queen h5 is the move 14th queen f3. Here again black has to know an important move, which is b3. Instead of b3, if black plays queen d8, white can castle long, bishop takes d6, and rook h e1. And well, yes, black should be better somehow, but still there are so many threats that white probably has enough compensation. Bishop e6, for example, doesn't work here. It loses immediately after queen h5. So white has bishop d7 also doesn't work because of knight takes f6. So there are some problems here. It's not that easy. So after queen f3, b3 is the strongest move. Of course, white has to play c3. He doesn't want to move the king because then he will lose the right to castle, and he'll not be able to bring rook. And knight c3 and queen c3 look terrible. So now queen d8 works much better. And the point is that white cannot castle long because of b takes a2. And after all, after king c2, black plays a1 queen, forcing the rook to go to a1, and now bishop d6, and now his position is better. Because the rook is on a1, not on d1, and white doesn't have enough time to create the pressure on both d and e file. That's a very important difference. So this move b3 is crucial. Short castle instead of long castle. But now queen takes d6, and white has nothing better but to take on b3. A takes b3, rook g8, rook a4, with idea rook f4, and now simply rook g4. Another strong move. The point is that if white takes on g4, black can take on g4, queen takes g4, and queen takes d5. So this closes the variation bishop g5. You probably need to remember it. Although I must say that the variation d4 is not played too often today. However, if someone plays it, then usually he has prepared something, and you need really to know these variations by heart. Because the variation d4 is the one where black can lose very quickly if he doesn't know how to play. This bishop sacrifice is very dangerous. Alright, now let me show you another way how white can create kind of compensation or play for compensation. Instead of bishop g5, he can play queen d4. I think this was the main line for a very long period of time. Now knight takes e4, queen takes e4, king f7, queen d5. If queen f3, then simply queen f6. And in general, white is in hurry, because if he allows black to take on d6 and to play rook f8 or rook e8, then there will be a big question: what does he have for the sacrificed bishop? So he has to play quickly. Queen d5. Well, yeah, there is one alternative to this move, namely bishop f4, with idea long castle. Here, black plays queen e8, bishop e5, queen c6, queen f4, king g8, long castle, and black goes with bishop d7. And it turns out that this position is very safe, because white has no way to create really serious threats to the black king, because all the white squares are controlled by black. So in the next move, black will play rook e8, then probably rook e6, and then starting to develop his king side with h5, rook h6, and so on. So white is too slow here. For this reason, queen d5 is the strongest move. Bishop e6, queen takes b7. Unfortunately, queen d7 doesn't work because of queen takes a8. But again, king g8 seems pretty good. Bishop f4, it's very important to keep the pawn d6. After queen takes b5, queen takes d6, obviously white has no compensation. Well, 3 pawns for a piece are usually in the sense of material equivalent, but in this situation, when the position is open and black has 2 bishops and the pawns are not going anywhere, I think the bishop is much stronger than the 3 pawns. So bishop f4 is the best way to keep the strong pawn d6. Now rook c8. If white takes on b5, black can take on d6 again. The point is that long castle does not work because of bishop takes f4 check. At the same time, rook d1 may not work because of bishop c4. And yeah, so if the queen moves, then the queen e7 check, and if rook takes d6, then queen takes d6, and black wins. So taking on b5 again is not so good. I think long castle is better, but then queen goes to d7. Again, we block the pawn d6. Black protects everything on a7, on b5. And if the queen moves back from b7, then black will simply play on white squares. He can play g6 or h5, trying to bring his rook from h8 into the game. He can simply play bishop f7 if he wants to, and the problem of white is that he cannot create any real threats again. So this is everything about tense queen d4. Now let me show the main move. Although it's difficult to say what is really the main move here, they are all about the same. So instead of queen d4, short castle. Yes, at least that looks like the most dangerous one. Knight takes e4 and queen h5. I think that rook e1 is too slow for different reasons. First of all, bishop f5 is a good possibility. Now queen h5 doesn't work, and if f3, then queen takes d6, and obviously black is winning here because white has only 1 pawn for the piece after he takes the knight, and in addition he closes the center instead of opening it. So h5 is the only move. There's no alternative to it. g6, queen e5, king f7, queen takes h8, and black plays simply knight f6. So here white has 2 moves. He can play bishop g5 or bishop h6. After bishop h6, black simply plays bishop e6. Now white is forced to take on f8. Queen takes f8. Bishop takes f8. Rook takes f8, and this position is slightly better for black in my opinion because he wants to play rook d8, and it will be extremely difficult for white to keep the pawn on d6. He may try it with both rooks on the d file, but then the rooks are passive, and I think in this situation the 2 pieces are stronger than rook and 2 pawns at the moment, and in potentially a rook and 1 pawn. Black doesn't experience any troubles in my opinion. After bishop g5, we have a similar story. Bishop goes to e6, rook a goes to d1, and black plays simple, bishop g7, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, rook f e1, and the rook d7. And again, the pawn is not going anywhere. Black wants to play bishop f8, then knight e8. Don't forget that the pawn a2 hangs also, so at some point black might take it, not immediately maybe, but later after playing a5, for example. And the pawn d6 is not strong. And the most important is that the black king is very close to this pawn on d6, and that's what matters the most in the endgame. So black has a better king. The king on g1 doesn't do anything, whereas the king on f7 is really playing in this game. Alright, so what it does, it actually closes the variation d4. So try to remember the main idea. You take on e4, play c6, and then the only position where you need to take care is when white sacrifices the bishop on b5. And here you probably need to memorize some of the variations. The last one with 10th short castle probably not, but the other two you will need to know by heart because they are dangerous. Alright, so towards the end of this part I will just mention how black should play if in move number 4 white takes on f5, because this is a very brief line and it doesn't make sense to make a separate variation out of it. So let's go back to the beginning. Here we are. So instead of d4, after f5, well, yeah, the first question is always what happens if white simply takes. And the answer is that black plays e4. So queen e2. After bishop takes c6, obviously black is fine. After d takes c6, queen e2, bishop f5, and now after d3, black simply plays queen e7. And after d takes e4, queen takes e4. He has slightly worse pawn structure, but he has two bishops in an open position, and this is more than enough compensation. So e4, queen e2, queen e7, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, knight e5, I'm sorry, knight d4, black plays knight f6, knight c3, and now queen e5. The point is that the knight on d4 doesn't have good squares. If he goes to b3, then bishop takes on f5, and black is very good. And if white plays knight e6, then bishop takes e6, f takes e6, bishop d6, strong move not to allow white to castle short, d3, e takes d3, c takes d3, and long castle. And the point here is that black will get the pawn on e6. If white plays f4, even he can even take on e2. King takes e2, and sorry, play g6 immediately in this position, not to allow white to play f5. And then the next move, then rook e8 and rook takes e6. So here black is very good. Alright, so this closes this part of the DVD. It was a little bit long, but the variation is also very important. And now we will move towards the main lines, because the d4 is a rare variation actually. We will move towards the main lines with first knight c3 in move number 4, and later then with force d3. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next